Welcome to The World This Week, Season 1, Episode 11, Trump's Meltdown. I'm Joe Lauria, the editor-in-chief of Consortium News. This week, Donald Trump is experiencing a humiliating political and economic climb down before the whole world. His criminal scheme to launch an unprovoked war of aggression against Iran is blowing up in his face. As every day passes, he risks an ever greater regional war and the collapse of the world economy. More than its effective drones and ballistic missiles, Iran's greatest weapon, causing its enemies the most pain, is economic. That is what is prompting the meltdown of Donald Trump. In his desperation to find a solution to a catastrophe that he thought would be a cakewalk, Trump is blaming U.S. allies, the Democrats, the media, everyone but himself and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the disaster affecting millions of lives. It is those two men who have, in just 1 month, unconscionably killed more than 3,000 innocent people in Iran and Lebanon, displaced well more than 1 million, caused deaths and injuries to dozens of their own citizens, and unleashed an economic crisis that threatens to become a worldwide depression that could halt Israeli and American expansionism in its tracks. Rather than the human cost, it seems that Iran's economic weapon is what troubles Trump most, causing him to scramble to find a way out. But he's trapped, and he's denying he is desperate. Joining us to discuss the staggering economic and political crisis these two men have unleashed is economist Richard Wolff. He's a professor emeritus of economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs at the New School in New York. Richard Wolff, thank you. Back again on Consortium News, CN Live, The World This Week.
Very glad to be here, Joe, and appreciate very much all your programs.
Right. Thank you so much. So, Richard, this seems to be as much an economic war as a military one. And from Iran's point of view, it seems to be key, the economic weapon, to their non-traditional military strategy here. This is what it seems to be getting at Trump, not the deaths of innocents and the so far low U.S. casualties. Would you agree that the economic weapon is Iran's greatest weapon in this war and their surprising show against the United States and Israel?
Absolutely, no question about it. We can disagree on many different things, but on that point that you just made, no person paying attention would disagree. There is a context to this. The Iranians knew, these are smart people. I like to remind everyone that the Iranian culture, if you like, the Iranian civilization, or what for most of its history was called Persia, is a very old human community, much older than Christianity, much older than Judaism. This is a part of the world where people have shared a common language, a common religion, Zoroastrian religion, and then Islam, when Islam came to that part of the world. They've held together across invasions, oppressions, wars. They've held on to their language and their culture. It would be folly to imagine that you could, with a few bombs, do to them what much worse has been done without being able to subordinate them. They never became a real colony. Europeans could never colonize them the way they did much of the rest of the world, and so on. So the Iranians were very smart. Here's a nation relatively poor, although quite well developed industrially, with 90 million people. They knew long before this war that in a military confrontation between them on the one hand and even Israel alone, but certainly Israel with the backing of the United States, that's a completely lopsided battle if it is waged in conventional military terms. So they always knew that that could not be their defense. If they were going to seriously risk or believe they were at risk to be attacked by the United States and or Israel, then they would have to come up with an alternative strategy or sequence of strategies to survive that. I mean, that doesn't take rocket science. It is the kind of judgment that their culture has made many times and mostly quite successfully. So they knew, as Mr. Trump must have known, or as the advisors around him must have known, that in the unfair military confrontation, these people have prepared. They're not going to go out there and refuse to give you what you want, knowing that the United States is committed to military adventures. My God, a half a year ago, Israel and the United States attacked them as if they needed a reminder that that could happen. And it's been going on and off ever since the West, the United States and Britain, overthrew their nationalist leader, Mossadegh, back in 1953. So we have a long preparation. And they knew that one of their key weapons was the Strait of Hormuz, and the fact that they are located on an international passage that has become enormously important because of the way the world economy has evolved. It gave them a counter weapon that might, and let me underscore, might offset the imbalance that would exist, on sheer military grounds. But then they weren't lazy. They also looked for other advantages. Iran is a huge country. A huge part of it is extremely mountainous. The ability to hide military and other facilities there is legendary, and they've always used it that way. It's a little bit like undertaking to attack Switzerland. You have to navigate these incredible mountains. They know how to do it. They have caves hidden where you didn't even think caves might be. Don't be stupid. These are very, and instead we've got, let me be blunt. We've got lots of stupid. We've got people who seem to have thought that lobbing missiles into this country or flying over, getting rid of their Air Force and their Navy. They didn't have much of an Air Force. They didn't have much of a Navy. And they knew that. I mean, what do you think you're dealing with here? It's almost as if the children are now confronting the adults and discovering the adults know something and the children don't know all that much. Mr. Trump has bitten off, as you put it, way more than he understood and way more than he can manage. And now he looks foolish, desperate, as he confronts the fact that he has no antidote to what the Iranians have managed to do that doesn't, in fact, make the situation worse in terms of oil prices and shipment possibilities and so on. And he doesn't know what to do. And his office, his cabinet doesn't know what to do. And things are being said that they're so off that you begin, and I watch this stuff carefully, you begin to wonder what they were eating or smoking or wow. I watched yesterday, just as one example, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is, I believe, in Europe or somewhere, talking to the G7, a grouping that barely exists anymore. But anyway, he's talking to them. And there he is explaining to them how outrageous it is that Iran should be thinking of charging a fee to the tankers that pass through the Strait of Hormuz. And why is that outrageous? Well, it contravenes international law, says Marco Rubio. We are a country that murdered, I don't know, 150 people in boats around the Caribbean and the Pacific, We didn't arrest him. We didn't give him a lawyer. We didn't give him a trial. We didn't give him a chance to confront their accusers. We just killed him on the spot, led by Mr. Rubio and the defense minister, excuse me, the war minister, and so on. I had to point out around the world when people asked about it that here in the United States, where we have drug traffickers and they are arrested from time to time, they get a court case, they get a lawyer, and even when they are found guilty, we don't kill them. What is this? This is against American law. And yet this man can stand. He's so far gone into whatever Kool-Aid they're drinking there that he can talk in this way. The whole world can't believe what they're watching. And the image of the United States as an utterly out of control rogue member of the Council of Nations is really spreading quickly.
You have to wonder why Trump is the man who did it. Netanyahu had admitted for 40 years he tried to get the U.S. to do this, and no president before Trump would do it wisely because they were told the Strait of Hormuz would be closed. They knew that Iran is not Panama in 1989. This is a country that can fight back. So Trump did it, whether there's some files that Mr. Netanyahu has that threatens to release on Trump, or whether they frightened him that the Iranians are trying to assassinate him. Whatever the case may be, they got Trump to agree to do something the Romans, as you point out, never did. The Romans never conquered Persia. Why does the American think that they can right now? But let me ask you about the economic situation. Um, is this the worst? Well, let's put it this way: the International Energy Agency has said this is the worst oil shock in history, worse than the mid 1970s oil embargo. And now the Houthis today in Yemen have joined the war. They sent a missile to Israel, and they're threatening to close the waterway that exits the Red Sea, through which I understand 8% of all world trade exits because it enters through the Suez Canal. Uh,
Right.
tell me, tell me just how bad it is right now, and how bad it can get in 6 months if this continues.
Well, let me try to get it across this way. We live, you, I, everybody watching or listening to this program, we live at a time when the world economy is a more integrated reality than it has ever been. You know, the clothes we wear, the food we eat, the shelter we rely on is composed of component parts that come from every corner of the world. Capitalism is a system in which profit is the guiding decider. Where are you going to build something? Where the profit is highest? Ooh, where might that be? Well, China or Malaysia or Peru or whoever. And so you go there because you make a lot of money there. But that means that you're going to have to ship components to that place and the finished product from that place to wherever it's going to be finally sold. So now the waterways, the airways, the road and rail systems become absolutely crucial because you have evolved your system not by some rational mechanism of how do we share this planet amongst all of us. No, no, no. That would be reasonable. We don't do that. We let profit decide where the railroad gets built, where the ships are docked. It's all determined by who's going to make the money that goes with it. The end result then is that you have an opportunity for a government like Iran, but for that matter, like the government of the Houthis, like many other governments, for example, the Panama government, or if the United States snatches it back, then the United States will be able to manipulate the world's dependence on these passageways, let's call them, to function. The reason this is the worst one is that the Iran's ability to block or close that passageway seems nearly total. They certainly have done it now for some weeks, despite all the efforts. An immense amount of noise comes out of Washington. People should be aware the whole world is being trained not to believe virtually anything. For example, mining. How are you going to mine all of this? You don't want mines there. Then you're going to have to remove the mines. Who removes mines? Well, there's special ships that do that. But if you brought those in, the missiles that they have would take care of the ship. You can't do it, Jack. And pretending you can, and it's a little bit loud now, like moving lots of Marines into that area. What are you going to do? 10,000 Marines? You're going to run a country of 92 million people? Persia? Really? Are you crazy? That's not going to work. Those people are solidly behind their government. They had divisions which this invasion blew out of relevance. The irony is you couldn't overthrow that government earlier in the year when you tried. The Israeli, remember, with their assassinations and all of that, that didn't work. The regime was strong enough. But now the opponents of the regime stumble over themselves to say how they're not opponents now, not when the country is being attacked, which should surprise nobody, except, of course, our government. Let me turn to the economics of it. Oil remains a vital, basic necessity of an economic system that is built up on the basis of profit. Let me do it again. Why are we oil dependent? Because it's a more profitable resource to give us the energies we need than anything else. We made some experiments with atomic energy. That is very dangerous. And so there's a certain hesitance. We are making some experiments across the globe with solar, with water, and so forth. And those are important and becoming more important. And nothing will stimulate that more than what we're seeing now, because the profitability of oil was premised on it being globally, cheaply available. And if something happens, which of course should have occurred to everybody, to interrupt this, it'll be too late because you've allowed your development not to be rationally based on, gee, we shouldn't become over dependent on any one source. It would be smarter if our energy were coming from multiple sources. On the old idea, diversify, your risk. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. But if you're profit driven, I want the cheapest basket. So you have oil, and oil is everywhere. And for those who don't know the basics, oil is the raw material for the gasoline, for the diesel fuel, for fertilizer, and for plastic. There are more things, but that's enough. Crude oil is the cheapest way to get the raw material for fertilizer, plastic, gasoline, and diesel fuel. Therefore, let me just give you an idea. Farming around the world, including in the United States, depends on fertilizer that requires the oil. What are you going to do now? It's spring. The farmers need the fertilizer, and they need it now, and they can't get it. The ships coming through the Strait of Hormuz are often ships loaded with fertilizer that has been made from the oil, or is oil on the way to being converted into fertilizer. Ditto for all kinds of plastic. Now, I mentioned diesel. Why? Diesel is the way oil fuels a truck. And a truck is what brings everything you buy, your food, your clothing, your shelter, the books sitting behind Joe as he speaks with me. Those are all brought to the bookstore, or if you order it from Walmart or Amazon, it's all trucks. And the price of diesel went from 3.50 a gallon before this war to around 5.50 now. Holy mackerel, that makes everything about to be raised in price. We're going to have an inflation. Every day that this lasts, the risk of an inflation gets worse, and the speed of that inflation gets larger. Mr. Trump won the presidency in part by promising to undo the inflation. He's making it worse. He's not undoing anything. I'm in California, speaking to you from San Francisco. In a cab ride I took today, the cabbie was complaining to me. He showed me what he just finished paying to to fill up the gas tank on the car he was driving. $8 a gallon. I had not seen that. California always charges more than the rest of the country. That's a profit game also. But $8. And he says, I cannot make a living anymore being a cab driver because the kind of cab he has, he buys the gas. I can't do it. I can't do it. And he's literally crying and talking about his children. And you have to repeat this a million times. So what Mr. Trump evidently didn't think through, and his advisors didn't think through, is that if you have the response that the resourceful Persian people would come up with, you better be very careful that what you rely on, bombs and missiles, is not going to be offset by an alternative set of powers they have over you. And the oil business, which America was so important in making a global profit engine, is going to come back and haunt you and be your undoing. That's what we're living through.
Do you think there could be a world depression? Some analysts are talking about that.
Absolutely, because what you're going to see, everyone now, and the pressure on Mr. Trump must be incredible, unless things are so far gone that they don't register it. But yes, everybody is now adjusting. And what we're going to have is a new economic global situation because these adjustments, the only way to explain this, they're not all reversible. In other words, there's an adjustment being made to a crazy price of oil. People may imagine, oh, when the oil price come down, then they'll reverse what they did. Oh, no, they won't. They're going to learn, for example, that they are better off. I'll give you an example because it's very dramatic. Mr. Trump was about to kill off Cuba. He's been telling us that for months. And one of the ways they were doing it was blockading, no more oil in and out. They didn't do that quite before. So now Cuba, which used oil to generate electricity, has blackouts, cannot keep the electricity going. Well, what's on its way to China are freighters, a bunch of them, from China. What are they carrying? Oil? No. Solar panels. China happens to be the world's greatest producer. They've developed that technology far beyond anyone else. They have the best solar panels in the world and the best batteries. They're the world's leader in solar panels to get the energy and then in batteries to store it. And that's what they're bringing to Cuba. Cuba will never go back to a reliance on energy. It will now do what, of course, you can ask the question, how come you didn't do this before? But they're doing it now, and it's not reversible when the oil price stops. So everyone is doing that. Everyone is trying to figure out what this means. You know, the transition from fossil fuel burning vehicle to electric vehicle is going to be accelerated by the cost and the difficulty of getting gasoline, especially if you can use alternative ways of generating electricity. So, yeah, it is so basic. It is so part of everything. And we don't know. I mean, we can become speculative here. But if you have a bad inflation, and again, that depends on how soon this issue gets resolved and how high the energy price has gotten before it's resolved. If Mr. Trump thinks by doubling down and heaving Marines in, he's going to solve this problem, well, we will have an inflation, and then we will see how well that's tolerated. In many societies, and I here include my own, I was born in America, born in Ohio, lived and worked here all my life. I don't know what the American people are going to do if they are now hit with a real bone crunching inflation that really damages their standard of living on top of everything else that's going on. You know, the trouble that a society as unequal as ours already has is going to be made much worse by really taking an axe to the standard of living of huge numbers of people who will not be able to afford most of the things in life as they hunker down to pay outrageous amounts for the car that without which you can't live in large parts of this country, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be very, very difficult here. By the way, even more difficult in Europe because Europe happens to be the consumer of what comes through the Strait of Hormuz, the oil and gas that comes from the Middle East that they rely on. Why? Because they're busy doing an economic war against Russia, refusing to buy Russia's oil and gas, which is very cheap and which they relied on for 50 years. You know, people who have admired the great German, in German it's called Wirtschaftswunder, economic miracle. Why did they like it? Well, I mean, I don't want to take away from the Germans. They're very, hardworking people, but they had the benefit of some of the cheapest oil and gas in the world. And Germany's now in recession, not because their workers suddenly didn't become productive or lost their skill. No, they are unproductive because their energy is three times the price they paid for it a few years ago before the Ukraine war ended all of that. So they're a perfect example. They Europe is I can't overstate this, Joe. Europe, my parents are Europeans. They were refugees. They came to live in the United States. That's why I'm an American. I grew up speaking French and German. I follow all those things. Okay, here's the reality. Europe is done from being the powerhouse of the world, that part of the world that colonized everything else and that led the way into industrialization. It is disappearing. The world economy is becoming a struggle between the United States on the one hand and China and its allies on the other. Guess who's missing? Europe. Europe is disappearing. One of the reasons Mr. Trump is so abrasive is he is enjoying, he shouldn't, it's not wise, but he's enjoying the demise of what I think he grew up thinking was a competitor. And that competitor is now on hard times, and he's being Mr. Muscleman. Very dangerous. Those Europeans are going to do everything they can to turn this situation around. And I, for one, wouldn't be surprised, and this is going to upset Americans, but one of the things that they may have to do is rethink their relationship to Russia and reopen their relationship there, because that might save them from what the United States is not going to help them, is going to watch them decline. It's changing the whole politics and economics and everything else of the world. So yeah, this is a monkey wrench thrown into the global economy that could change and will change almost everything. And if he keeps up, if Mr. Trump cannot come up with some, what are they calling it, an off-ramp, a way to get out of this mess he has made, it will get much, much worse. Sending
That's
sending the Marines is plain stupid.
you're leading into my next question. But the economic information and proxy war against Russia that was launched by the United States and Europe is blowing up in their faces, just the way
Yeah.
Iran's blowing up in Trump's face and Netanyahu's. What are the options that Trump has right now? He cannot attack Hormuz. He would have done it already. What
Yes.
option does he have but to put to in Haaretz this morning there was an article talking about the smell of defeat for the U.S. and Israel. So the mainstream media even in Israel is starting to recognize what's happening. What are the options that Trump and Israel have right now to get out of this mess? And he does look very desperate.
Well, I hate to say it this way, but I don't know how else to say it and be honest. He has he has no choice. He has to get out. He has to get out. And it's not clear that the Iranians are going to let him out. They don't have to.
Right.
He can do his Trumpian best. He can say, I knocked the crap out of them. We won, and all of that. The way Mr. Rubio, as I mentioned before, gives lectures on respect of international law, and the whole world will shake its head, but they won't stop him because they want it over. But here's the important thing, Joe, which is more important than anything we've discussed to this moment. The Iranians happen to be, it could have happened elsewhere in the world, but the Iranians happen to be the people in the right place at the right time to do something that is world historic. They are telling the United States in a very practical way, your empire is over. We're not letting you go. You want to go? You want to declare victory? Get lost. You know what we've done? We've bombed every military base in all those 8 countries that we call the Gulf states around there. Bahrain, UAE, Qatar, all of them. And we're not going to let them function. They're not going to be and therefore you're not going to control the oil either. We are. Because oil that sits under the sand is no use. Oil you bring up and can't move is no use either. And we're going to be in charge of all of that with our control of the strait, with our missiles and guns. And the Americans, what are they going to do? If I had time, I would take your audience through. When we made the deal back in the 70s to buy all the oil and gas that they could bring up out of the Middle East, countries like Saudi Arabia and all the others, it worked out to the American advantage in a brilliant way, in the way things do when you're the emperor. So they got the oil and shipped it to us. We got lots and lots of cheap oil. When I was a teenager, just starting to drive, I remember that gas was under $1 a gallon, and every kid could play around with a car. Okay, they they are saying to the United States, all of that is over. You're not going to be in charge. We sold you the cheap oil and gas. You gave us the dollars. We agreed to make dollar the only currency we'll accept no matter where we sell the oil. And suddenly the whole world needed dollars, and our dollar became the global currency, the sign of an empire when everybody in the world wants your currency. Well, they had to, because they had to buy the oil, and oil was the most profitable energy source. And what did they do with all the dollars? They lent them to the United States. They allowed the American government to do what Mr. Trump is doing big time, and that is running enormous deficits. having the government spend way more money than it raises in taxes. Why? Because it can borrow. But who does it borrow from? One of the major lenders are the Gulf states. That's how they hold their wealth in the treasury notes of the United States. We could then run a deficit. We sent the dollars over there to get cheap oil and gas, and they sent it right back as loans to our government. We win every which way going. And it was a wonderful 40 years. Here's what I'm trying to get across. The Iranians are now realizing they have the power. The United States can't do much about it, and they're making a demand. And the importance of this, I cannot exaggerate. Even if they don't get what I'm about to tell you, the very fact that they're in a position of seriously demanding it is telling you where history is going. And here's the demand of the Iranians. We'll end the war. You got to leave the Middle East. Wow. Whoa. Oh, I mean, it takes your breath away. In their own way, this little country, let's remember, 90 million people, US has 330 million. So as countries go, sizable, but not the big shot. But they're in a position to say, we want you out of here because you threaten us all the time. You have threatened us ever since 1953. We can't, you want to know why we're tolerating all the bombing and that you're doing now as a nation? Because we understand if we don't make a stand now, we will forever exist under your shadow of the tomahawk over our head. And they're right. Who's going to argue with this? You want them to believe in the goodwill of Mr. Trump, or for that matter, Mr. Biden? Stop. These are people hooked into Israel, hooked into the empire of the United States, and they want it all to work for them. And the Iranians are saying, the cost to us has been too much, and we're not going to do it anymore. And we have the means to put the whole world on notice to squeeze you because it's costing too much of the rest of the world. The United States is becoming the country in the world that everyone else fears, but also is beginning to hate. And that is not a good sign for this country's future. That makes us look more and more like Germany in the 30s rather than the agent of a better world, which was something we were able to look like for a while in the 20th century. So I do think, sorry for the long answer, but your question, does this whole confrontation have the ability to shake the whole world? The answer is it's already doing that.
It's extraordinary, and you're making my job very easy, which I guess you're anticipating all my questions. But I want to go a little deeper into the idea of American
Yeah.
empire. First of all, most Americans deny they even have an empire, which is an extraordinary thing in itself.
Right.
They've been able to get away with that. My theory is in the 19th century under McKinley and that era, they were proud of an empire, as Europeans were. They're having an empire. And Mark Twain was in the anti-imperialist league. The idea that America was an imperialist power was not controversial. But then
No.
when the Soviets dirtied the word imperialism, I think Reagan started calling the Soviets the evil empire. We're not an empire. You're an empire, right? Well, one time when an American, John Edwards, was running for president in 2008, and the New York City radio asked him in an interview, "Are we an empire? Is American empire?" And it was 10 seconds of dead air, and he said, "Gee, I hope not." So this whole idea of being an empire, I don't think you and I and most people watching this show have any doubts about that. Where does it stand now? You brought it up. I was thinking that Iran is like Carthage for America. There's an obsession with destroying Iran, the way the Romans had an obsession with destroying Carthage. But now I'm thinking it may be the Waterloo for the United States, Iran.
Yes, exactly. That's my point. That's what's happening. Look, we are living toward the end of the colonial era. I mean, World Wars One and Two should be understood as the worst wars the human race has imposed on itself as a people. And if you go and study them, they were all about the struggles among half a dozen colonial powers: Britain, France, Germany, Japan, Russia. What were they fighting about? They were grabbing parts of the world, Africa, Asia, Latin America, stepping on each other's toes, and eventually it blew up. Okay. That led to, because it was the end, it led to the weakening of all of them. And that gave the moment for the colonized people to rise up and say, oh, they just blew themselves apart in Europe and Asia. This is our chance to get free. So Mahatma Gandhi leads a peaceful revolt in India, depriving Britain of what the British called, the crown jewel of their empire, this enormous. Remember, Britain is a little cold, wet island off the mainland of Europe, is in charge of India, which is the colossus of South Asia. I mean, it's a David and Goliath absurdity kind of thing. Anyway, in the 20th century, starting after World War One and really gaining speed after World War Two, all the old colonial powers broke away. India becomes independent. All of Africa basically becomes, in some countries they have to fight a war. In Kenya, they had the Mau Mau War to get rid of the British. In the Belgian Congo, they had to fight the Belgians out. In France, I mean, until recently, they were still fighting French expeditionary military force, trying desperately to hold on. But we live in the era of anti-colonialism. One of the things the United States did for a while was kind of suggest that it was with these countries after World War II because it was a very good, allow me to say, clever way to replace the British, French, and German empires by your own, by claiming you had an affinity with these colonial people because the United States had been a colony of Britain once upon a time, too. I mean, true enough. And it hid the realities of the empire. But this is a time when the people of the world, and I'm talking about the vast majority of them, are celebrating getting out from under colonialism. It's an anti colonial period of human history. And that may upset you, particularly if you're a white racist for all the obvious reasons, but it is the reality. And now let's take a look at it. There's only one country that is trying in an active way to colonize, and that's Israel. Israel is a settler colonialist, very classic. We should understand it in the United States because that's our country. Europeans come here, ethnically clean whoever lives here at that time, the native people wrongly called Indians because they didn't know where they were going. But they came and they got rid of all of them and took over. Israel is trying to get rid of the Palestinians. They're Indians, they're native people. They came through arrangements made in colonizing Europe by Britain, above all. Oh, you go there, you Jewish people, go over there. So they went over there. But there were people there, you know. You can't do that. Israel is trying to do. You could do it in the 17th century. But you can't do it now. The 17th century wasn't an era of anti-colonialism, quite the opposite. It was the culmination of the Europeans going out to the world, conquering Asia, Africa, Latin America, and discovering. Well, that was all the spirit of the time. The United States was just part of all of that. But now Israel's all alone. It's trying to do in the 21st century against the entire movement of history. I say that only if you want to understand why the Israelis could end up being this brutal and this just horrible as examples of human being. It's because they're trying, in their minds, they're necessarily forced, but that's a different matter, how they cognize it. But they are trying to do something which is historically impossible. Now comes the United States. We are also facing the end of an empire. It's a different kind of empire because we didn't set up colonies that revolt. We didn't do that. That was not the way we did it. We did it to Latin America. You can be independent, but if you step out of line, we're going to come and fix you real quick. So we had that kind of empire. But that's not surviving anymore either. And that is terrifying the United States. I understand it. I really do. I understand that when empires decline, which every empire the history of the world has ever had did, there's no reason to doubt that the United States empire, born out of the decline of the British Empire, literally, evolving over a century or two, is now declining. I mean, this is what we should expect. But decline is not as much fun as the 19th and 20th century when we were going up and taking over. So you're going to now see, I don't know how else to say it, the pathology of decline all around us. And don't we? That's what Mr. Trump is, Joe. He is a symptom of that grandiosity. I'm going to take Greenland and I'm going to make Canada What is this raving nutbag doing? Well, he's trying. I'm not trying to cultivate sympathy. I'm just trying to understand. So I understand him. He is performing a theater that an awful lot of Americans want to see, that we are not the declining empire. Look at us. We're expanding. The other presidents didn't control those Iranians. I will. Yeah, until the history smacks him across the fingers and he realizes he can't do that he or the United States are not in a position to change the historical process that's bigger than all of us, that created the United States, that gave it its 2 centuries of exaltation, and is now saying, like the Iranians, looking at us and saying, it's over. You know what we want after you've attacked us? We want you out of the Middle East. We want your empire to be formally your bases have to be closed. Your troops can't be stationed here. Then the oil will flow. Then the strait will be fine, but you're gone. You are not going to hold hostage all of the people around here because your empire is declining. And you've made a mistake. You've got and I say this because even if I'm wrong, and even if you and I are wrong, and even if somehow he pulls another rabbit out of the hat in Iran, okay, then it'll be the next one. It'll just be the next country where this game is played out. Last point, because it has to be made. Mr. Vance, our vice president, I believe it was he, I may have gotten that wrong, but I believe it was him, who said something about how they're running, or maybe it was Trump himself, they're running out of missiles and drones because that's America's mechanized military is now missiles and drones, basically. Uh, this is crazy. And what I don't know what to do with when my leaders are crazy. Russia and Iran have been working together for many, many years. They have a common border on the Caspian Sea. Anything that Russia produces in continental Russia, and let's remember, Russia is the largest by geography, country on earth. Anything produced in that immense country can move into Iran without crossing any other border. In other words, it's an open border. And what about the border between Russia and China? It's even bigger, longer, 1,000 miles. And who's the greatest producer of missiles and bombs? Well, it's the manufacturing center of the world. And for those who haven't paid attention, that's the People's Republic of China. They can outproduce us in terms of cannons and missiles and drones indefinitely. And they can give them all to Russia indefinitely, who can pass them all to the Iranians indefinitely. What are you doing? You can't even win on your own terms. It's over, Jack. And your best bet, don't keep pushing it because it'll come back to haunt you, as this whole adventure did. Last June, when they had the 12-day war, Israel, United States against Iran, one of the reasons it ended in 12 days was that something happened, well reported in Europe, not so well in the United States, which was that the so-called Iron Dome that was supposed to protect Israel didn't. And the Americans helping Israel couldn't either. The Iranians had good enough missiles and drones from whom? From Russia and China. And over the last 9 months, they've improved them. They're now more precision, more sophisticated, and more of them. And where are they hidden? In the vast mountains of Iran that nobody can touch. You know, there's a joke in Europe, you don't hear it in this country because it's too painful, that Iran, or the Chinese, I believe, made for Iran at the cost of $200 a piece decoys, little devices that look like a missile in a silo, buried over here. And can't be by electronic means, you can't distinguish the $200 fake from the, I don't know, $1 million real one. So the United States is taking its much more expensive missiles and heaving them into the nothingness, into fake, and the Iranians are laughing all the way to the mosque. I mean, this is a joke.
Yep.
But it isn't funny because it reflects these larger processes that we've been talking about.
Richard, there's 5 minutes left, so I want to just end with one more question. And it was just a few weeks before the launching of this war that Marco Rubio was in Munich making this incredible speech at the security conference. He sounded like Cecil Rhodes. The American empire is back again. The white man is going to rule the world. It was an extraordinary speech. The worst part was the European delegates all stood up and applauded him. Shows you the mentality of the colonial mindset, even though it's an anti-colonial period, is very much alive and well in Europe. But let's talk about the Middle East itself, what these consequences are going to be. It seems like there are overlapping empires. There's the Greater Israel Project overlapped by the Greater America Project, if we can call that the American Empire. Obviously, for the U.S., the Middle East is a very important part of world domination, but their proxy is fighting this war. So the other day in the New York Times, there was an article about Mohammed bin Salman, and he was saying that pushing Trump to continue the war because this is a historic opportunity to remake the region. Of course, in Saudi's vision, the Israelis are trying to remake the region in their idea, and so now are the Iranians. Who's going to win? What what happens to the Israel project now? That's what I want to focus on in the last 5 minutes. If in fact the U.S. leaves the region, if that world-shattering event could take place, that would be extraordinary. What would it mean for Israel?
Israel has made a commitment, Lord knows why, has made a commitment to be a militarized wing of the United States empire, to sell its soul to the United States, to rely on the United States for its economic survival, its military, everything. And therefore, they are in no position to bargain about anything. Yes, they can offset the horrible dependence they have on the United States by APAC, by buying enough power in the United States that they can use the one to balance and limit uh, their dependence. But their future, I don't know if Israel can survive what it is doing. You cannot be the killer of vast numbers of Arab people, Palestinian people, and pretend that that's not going to matter. That you're living in some biblical universe of this one smiting the next one. I, Maybe they believe all of that stuff, but I see them as the most vulnerable of all of these, and that's before telling you that if I were a betting person, I'm not, but if I were, I would bet that one of the ways Mr. Trump may offset for himself the damage he has led himself into is by blaming the Israelis, by switching gear, and instead of them being our great buddies, will become our great betrayals. And there's enough reservoir of real anti-Semitism, not the fake crap that they've been using to attack university. That's nonsense. But there's enough real anti-Semitism and enough desire by Americans to blame anybody, not particularly Jewish people, but anybody else, that might give him a way out, and he'll just sell them down the river. And nobody at this point, they have alienated so many other people that they have nothing else. They will be sitting there, and that's one of the reasons they may go after them, because they're so vulnerable. Where are they going to turn? There's nothing they can do. And those Jewish people will get up, like the Jewish people have done in the past, and they'll have to go and wander as their people have done for thousands of years, because this homeland was managed in such a way that they took away their home, which wouldn't be the first time for those people, as a culture, as a civilization. So I don't have my, and I think the United States is is about to lose its empire. It's not going to get Greenland. It's not going to get Canada. Probably won't even get Panama. It won't make much difference. The Chinese are busy doing end runs around the Panama thing. It's over. It's over not because of this or that detail. Let me close with this. It's over because for the last 40 years, what the Chinese discovered, what they call socialism with Chinese characteristics, produced an economic growth of their GDP every year of between 6 and 9%. It's been lower the last 2 or 3 years at around 5%. Over the same 40-year period, the United States GDP grew an average of 2.25%. That's it. You cannot have that disparity without one, China, catching up and overtaking, and everything follows from that change.
Richard Wolff, thank you very, very much for your time today to help us understand better what's going on in the Middle East and the broader world. For Joe Laurie, sorry, for Consortium News, The World This Week, and our producer, Kathy Vogan, we thank our audience for joining us on The World This Week, and we'll speak to you again soon. Goodbye.
Get out your notebook. There's more. If you are a consumer of independent news, then the first place you should be going to is Consortium News, and please do try to support them when you can. It doesn't have its articles behind a paywall. It's free for everyone. It's one of the best news sites out there, and it's been in the business of independent journalism and adversarial independent journalism for over 2 decades. I hope that with the public's continuing support of Consortium News, it will continue for a very long time to come. Thank you so much.